All right, welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us at this discussion. Um, as we look at how other countries might react to the United States establishing a strategic Bitcoin reserve, we're just waiting for the other panelists to join, and then we'll get going.
We are here.
We're all here. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. So I often say that in the future, whoever holds the most Bitcoin wins. For the first time in our lifetime, sound money is back on the global agenda, and Bitcoin is no longer fringe. With the US now starting to formalize a strategic Bitcoin reserve, the rest of the world's watching, and the real question is next, who will act? This panel is going to explore that, what this means in policy, regulations, monetary strategy, and especially global power dynamics. Let's meet our panelists. I'll ask each of you guys just to introduce yourselves quickly. You've got a 30-second window. Tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and what lens you're bringing into this conversation. I think if we can start with Susie, it would be fantastic to hear from you.
Thank you. Well, I'm the CEO and co-founder of Bitcoin Policy UK and a journalist focused on Bitcoin energy and policy. I've written about the intersection of Bitcoin and energy, trying to counteract the fires against Bitcoin mining and provide energy solutions through policy. I also work with policymakers in the UK to advocate for everyone who uses, holds and mines Bitcoin in the UK, of course.
Brilliant. Great to have somebody from that side of the pond. Rob, if you want to introduce yourself.
But I've also an opportunist and traveled the world, lived everywhere, lived in America, lived in Europe. And I've become, about a year ago, Bitcoin maximalist, as has my wife. Our family are hooked. And I'm finding it very difficult to look at any investments around the world in any sector compared to Bitcoin. I keep saying, but Bitcoin's the surest thing I've ever seen.
Well, brilliant. And I think that'll definitely help achieve Saifedean's values that he was speaking of in the first session from today. Brian?
Thanks, James. Hi, everyone. Brian Whitehurst. I'm the Chief of Staff and Global Head of Regulatory Affairs at Liberty City Ventures. We are a blockchain infrastructure VC based out of New York City. Prior to joining to Liberty City, I spent 12 years doing securities and commodities fraud litigation at the New York Attorney General's office, and actually started the crypto and blockchain practice, for lack of a better term, there at the New York AG's office, and led investigations over the years into Tether, BlockFi, Celsius. So you name it, I was probably involved in it up until about mid 2022. So thanks.
Brilliant. So it's fantastic to have a diverse set of panelists from all over the world, from the best, three of the best cities in the world: Cape Town, London, New York. We're all represented. I'm James Core from Simple Bitcoin, and I live in the Garden Route in South Africa, not too far from Rob. And I help companies and individuals to set a strategic Bitcoin reserve up, and I've been doing so for about 8 years. So it's fantastic to be together, and an honor to be with everybody. I wanted to start off, Brian, when we were in our discussions a little bit earlier, you shared how the strategic reserve from Donald Trump's executive order may not come to fruition for quite some time. Why don't you explain that to us and to our audience?
Yeah. So what Donald Trump did was issue an executive order naming or establishing a Bitcoin strategic reserve. And I put that in quotes because he doesn't have the actual power to create a strategic reserve that is legally binding and in effect for federal policy. He named it a strategic reserve, but really all he did was create a stockpile or establish a stockpile that is able to take what we currently have in our from our seized assets held by the U.S. Marshals. It says that nothing can be done with them. A strategic reserve according to the letter of law, needs to be created through a congressional act. So while a step has been taken to do that, it is not a actual reserve that he created. He just named it that reserve. So I think that is an important caveat when all of these discussions are taking place, that the US has not yet created a strategic reserve. They've created the Bitcoin stockpile, and then also the stockpile for the other assets.
How long would
Very
it take, Brian? How long would it take?
Yeah, so
If it
second part of
happened.
that, if it were to happen, listen, we still have to pass, a market structure bill in the U.S. We have a stablecoin bill to hopefully pass, and those have taken years. I can't tell you how many times I've gone to Washington D.C. and had meetings with congressional members, and they said, "Oh, we're a few months away from passing these," and it's still happening. So currently, stablecoin bill is looking to pass. Hopefully by August, we'll see a market structure bill. But the realities are, on a strategic reserve bill making its way through Congress, while there is a draft of one bill, I would say, if I were a betting man, I would put the over under at like 2 years before something were to actually come forth. There's just too much more, even outside of crypto, for Congress to tackle. And then things get into an election year, which completely changes the equation on anything getting done. So there's really limited amount of time for this to move forward from the congressional act, which is why Trump put forth the executive order to at least do something in the interim.
Do you think that it makes any difference that it's a stockpile and not an actual strategic reserve? Is there any difference between the two at all, or is it just words?
No, there's a huge difference. One, the stockpile can only take what is currently held. So federal government, DOJ, whoever seizes assets for various reasons. And if you were to read the executive order, there are caveats at the bottom that say anything that hasn't already been assigned. So courts will require the return of certain seized assets to victims of crimes, or they could get earmarked for having to go to certain agencies for various things. Then whatever is left over is what the U.S. Marshal's Office will put up for auction, or sell in the open market. It is those things that what Donald Trump is saying, those portion of the assets that need to be held, that they can't be sold if they're not earmarked for anything else. So that's all they can do. They can hold it. They can't sell it. They can never add to it, which is a huge difference for the strategic reserve. With the strategic reserve, like oil or commodities like grain or other things, the federal government is actively buying those in the open market and adding to the reserves in order to hold them for emergencies or to sell off at a future point in time. That can't happen without the congressional act. So I think that is a very important distinguishing factor.
And can states go ahead and set up strategic Bitcoin reserves faster than the government? Texas, for example.
I mean, individual states can set up their own, and a number of states have put forth legislation to try to create a strategic reserve within those states. Admittedly, I'm not up to speed on every state, but I know a number of them have. It's just a matter of time and how much their allocation they have to put forth purchasing Bitcoin. I mean, I personally am on the side of, at what point is too much, as states or countries even are creating these, because there is a limited supply of Bitcoin, and while that's great for the price, the liquidity ultimately is not going to be there as much for everything else that I think comes with what everyone wants Bitcoin to be. And to Susie, meet your view of Bitcoin is everything, and Robert, that you've never seen a better investment. And yeah, like I said, it's great for liquidity, or it's great for the investment side, but when you're decrease liquidity that much, it's like, what is that inflection point?
So if they're completely different, then if you've got a stockpile that's actually called a strategic reserve, will that cause any kind of problems? Because the naming suggests that it's something completely different.
I mean, that's question for every other country that is trying to potentially play catch up, which I think James will get into more. But
Well,
listen, the ecosystem is going to run, and the industry ran with it and said that he created a strategic reserve, which he did in name. That's what it's called. So that's what he created. I think it's still, even as a stockpile, it's still positive for the industry. But I really, it's a matter of other governments and how they treated it and how they look at it and whether they truly understand it, what that effect will be. But
well, I
James,
think,
I feel like I've
yeah,
monopolized this, so let's.
but it's fantastic, Brian, because it frames the discussion a little bit clearer than some of the other ones we've had already today, and maybe triggers a little bit of hopium for for the emerging markets. The guys, Susie, I'm not sure exactly where the UK is at in terms of Bitcoin adoption. Answer that for us first, and then we'll ask Rob about Africa.
We're in a very tricky situation, considering we were our leaders in computer science and financial services, and the third largest holders of Bitcoin was 61,250. The FCA, the Financial Conduct Authority, are causing an immense amount of harm because they haven't distinguished the difference between Bitcoin and crypto. So they're putting Bitcoin, which is a pristine asset and a commodity, in the same basket as something that a trader can spin up in their office over a weekend. And they're causing consumer harm, they're driving out business, and they're preventing growth. So I would say that the UK have a lot of work to do, and I'm not 100% convinced we'll ever catch up.
Well,
But
it
we're going
comes
to
down
try.
to
We're trying. We're here to try and fight for the cause.
Rob. What are you seeing in the emerging markets in Africa specifically, South Africa or the rest of the continent?
Sub-Saharan Africa is only 2.7% of global crypto adoption. So Africa is not on the map yet. But there's some incredible initiatives going on. I mean, Ethiopia, for example, has the biggest sovereign wealth fund in Africa with $47 billion US, which is tiny in US terms, but it's pretty big in African terms. Followed by Algeria, Zambia, and then it drops off down to 3 billion. So they're not sovereign wealth funds, but there are other initiatives happening in Africa. I mean, Ethiopia is big in Bitcoin mining already. But in South Africa, our government is discussing, looking at it. But the main initiative is a company called Altvest. And James, you know Altvest very well. It's Warren Wheatley and Stafford Marzi. And I think they've been on some of the panels earlier. But it's one of the great listed, it's a MetaPlanet MicroStrategy hybrid for South Africa. And if that comes off, it could pull South African corporates who are sitting on $75 billion US of cash. They're not investing it. It could pull South African corporates into Bitcoin in a big way. So it might happen that way around. Altvest, South African corporates, and then the South African government. But the government's not going to do anything in the near future. They tend to be followers. In the rest of Africa, we're hearing of initiatives, but there's nothing, nothing that compares with Altvest in South Africa, in my view.
Very interesting. Do you think the move from Donald Trump was provocative? Is it causing people to really take a step back and start looking at this technology? What are you seeing on the ground?
Without a doubt. What Bitcoin solves are a lot of the problems that African countries, African currencies face. And Bitcoin could very much be the solution to a lot of the problems, like, potential de-dollarization, BRICS versus the West and the US, reserve diversification, currency volatility. I mean, Bitcoin's a big and important potential solution to all these problems that Africa faces. So I suspect that an El Salvador type country will come out of the blue in Africa and will trigger some real interest in Africa. You may see things happening in Africa faster than other parts of the world.
So you think
I actually wrote about this. Oh, sorry, James.
No, carry on, Susie. Great to hear from you.
I wrote about used to have a column called My Two Sats in City AM, and I used to be able to rant about how broken the world was and how Bitcoin could fix it. And one of the articles that I wrote was how the rise of BRICS, and how there's going to be a big innovation and financial drain from west to east. And I can really see, because the global south really do need Bitcoin, that's where all the innovation is happening. And I can absolutely see where Rob's going with that.
Brilliant. Great insight there. So, Brian, you're on the other side of the pond. Are you in the US? Do other people on the ground understand the difference, and that there may be a lag, as you said, a 2-year opportunity to front run the strategic reserve, or is it very much everyone's fallen into the marketing mantra of the executive order?
It's probably a split. I mean, I think there are people that just want to continue to uh, uh, keep with the positive goals and the momentum that's been going on, really since Trump won in November. So they're enthusiastic about this next step, but but also, I mean, admittedly, not everyone fully understands the ins and outs of, even those people living in the U.S., the ins and outs of how, like, congressional acts work, how bills actually get passed, what is an executive order versus what is an actual bill, what effect that really has on other agencies. It is a very confusing system we have. Um, so I would say the vast majority are like, oh, great, we have a strategic reserve now. It's all full steam ahead, and we're going to go there. I'm sure there are many smart people though here also that understand the terminology and and really what is happening, and will probably use that as potential to front run, or to build up their personal holdings in the event of something actually happening down the line.
Very interesting. Brian, you spoke earlier of the limited supply of Bitcoin, and you were concerned perhaps that we shouldn't all be just buying it. There might not be enough to go around.
No, I mean, I'm not saying that we shouldn't buy it. I'm saying, how much do we want, if every country in the world, and I mean, not even every country, if the top 50 countries in the world have a strategic reserve, and then you have, I don't know, let's say 25 states here in the US and other individual states or jurisdictions or territories and provinces in other countries potentially doing that. That is going to decrease the limited supply. And how much effect does that have on, the market, and where, obviously it can be hugely fractionalized. I understand the aspect of it, but what effect does that have down the line when ultimately we get to that point where Bitcoin is no longer minted anymore, and it is, or mineable, and it's just what we have. Um, the what is it? The 21 million Bitcoins in circulation. So where do we go from there? And I think that's just a natural question of what's next, and how much is too much potentially.
Okay, it's an interesting one to consider. Susie, on your side in the UK, obviously you're doing a lot of policy work, but you're engaging, I imagine, with other institutions and on that level. Are you seeing the demand for Bitcoin growing, and as a result of the strategic reserve move?
No, they haven't woken up yet, unfortunately. We have the highest energy prices in the world, and demand response and flexible load is an obvious way. Introducing Bitcoin mining into our energy solutions and systems would be an absolute no-brainer. We spend nearly £1 billion on curtailed wind every single year, and that goes on to our bills. If we didn't have to shut down and we could just mine Bitcoin, it would be win-win.
Yeah.
It's an obvious solution, and even then they don't look at it, and nothing's changing, because these energy producers are not incentivized to do so. It all comes back to bad policy and bad incentives. That said, we have actually in the past month or so noticed a very slight shift with people who are taking more of an interest in what we're doing, not necessarily the current government, but around the edges and in the shadow cabinet. So I do feel quite hopeful that conversations are starting to happen, and that they will happen more. Just it's not as quick as we would like it to be. However, we're here and we're ready to educate, and when people are willing to listen and hear about the amazing solutions that Bitcoin has to offer, then we'll be ready and waiting.
I mean, where I saw it was, I was waiting for that Microsoft board meeting to go, yes, we're going with Bitcoin, and they decided not to. And then obviously Trump's announcement of the non-strategic business Bitcoin reserve, as Brian so beautifully put it, the executive order. I hope that would create more momentum, but I think we're in a period of a little bit of limbo. There's a bit of a fog right now, with a lot of people looking increasingly more into corporate sovereign wealth funds, countries, states, and no one's quite sure who's going to move. But I think at some point, hopefully in the near future, but maybe the medium term, someone big will, a South Korea or a Japan or a sovereign wealth fund in the Middle East will go, we're all in, and that will just trigger a rush. We'd hoped it would in the US, but
we've
I think
still
everyone's
got
sitting
a
around
huge...
the table waiting for someone else to make the move. But they will make the move. Someone will.
How do you bridge the education gap? Because we've been hit in the mainstream media, and this is a lot of how our politicians think, with a lot of anti-Bitcoin sentiment, and unwinding that damage is going to be really difficult. So when we do speak to people, they still think that it boils the oceans, it's a Ponzi scheme, and it's for criminals. So even though game theory will start to play out, no doubt about it, we still have to educate people correctly. And it goes back to Brandolini's law, the asymmetry of bullshit. It's going to be really difficult to unwind that damage and actually get them to understand what we're dealing with here.
One person at a time, and it's happening.
Yes, true.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I mean, and not to, trust me, we have been well behind the 8 ball on this for years, but I do think if and when the US comes out with legislation on stablecoin and a market structure bill, I think that will give other countries potentially probably more comfort in getting and starting to have these conversations and taking more of a look at it and willing to have engage with the industry more and learn more about it. Thus far, we have perpetuated that the ideas that is potentially all scam and this, that, and the other, and we had our issues with SBF and FTX and him cozying up to people on the Hill and everything. So I mean, there is still that stigma for sure. It is dwindling here in the U.S. Every day. Like the majority of bills have bipartisan um, uh, support, which is not something you have a lot of these days on just about anything coming out of Washington. So I think once we get to that point and start pushing things forward in the U.S., hopefully you see the rest of the world take more notice too.
Yeah, great.
But again,
Fantastic.
I don't think we're the only players in town. Like other countries are doing great things on this and have led. EU has Hong Kong, Singapore. I mean, Japan, for everything that, for as strict as their regulations are, they have at least had things in place for nearly a decade now, which I think is a testament to how they want to like make sure they're staying on top of stuff. Yeah, I mean, there's just a lot going on. But again, the U.S. is an important part of all of it.
Absolutely. I saw a podcast from Anthony Pompliano earlier today, and I think he was interviewing Bo Hines, and Bo was basically saying we're going all in. We need to buy as much Bitcoin as we can. I think what you're saying is that they can't really do that yet.
Yeah,
But,
I mean, I know they're trying to find out ways that they can, but
okay.
hey, listen, maybe they come up with something else. Like there's a lot going on in the U.S. right now, and the administration is doing things that are completely out of the norm. But what I do know is that Congress allocates how money can be spent. That does not come from the president's office or the administration. Like, so they can't just take allocation money and just start buying Bitcoin on their own. They do need that act. Now, again, I've been surprised many times over the past a few years. So something could change.
Yeah.
Maybe they're coming up with something creative, Maybe they're going to ignore everything and say we don't care and just start doing it. But there is, technically speaking, a process, and even if they do start doing something, it could be short-lived because the next president that comes in would be able to stop or change anything.
Brilliant. I think the one thing that kind of echoes through what you were saying, Susie, and Brian, it takes bold leadership to get this kind of thing through. And I'd actually be interested to hear, Rob, have we got that bold leadership in South Africa, or have you identified anybody else in the rest of the continent, perhaps, or emerging markets that might have that bold leadership, like Bukele? And the guys at Bhutan who've obviously been mining Bitcoin for some time.
So the Bukele of Africa is Paul Kagame of Rwanda. You know, he's the most pro-West, open-minded, dynamic leader in Africa. And I wouldn't be surprised. We should get to him. We should go and talk to Paul Kagame. But I wouldn't be surprised if he's looking at it. And then you've got some quite sophisticated financial countries in Africa, like Mauritius, for example. They could easily come out of the box. I have doubts about South Africa. I think South Africa is going through a very difficult moment, and they're not going to do it. But what about Ethiopia? You know, those are my three countries in Africa that I'd watch very carefully, because they're creative and intelligent, and they get it.
Yeah, and the bold leadership. Susie, are there people in the regulatory space that you feel might just pop out of the woodwork? Maybe some Bitcoiners who've been in hiding.
In the what space? Sorry.
Well, in the UK government parliamentary environment.
Oh yes.
Nigel.
Nigel. Nigel, yeah. He's a definite Bitcoiner, absolutely. I think, unfortunately, the Reform Party are going through some difficulties at the moment, so it's difficult to know which way the wind is going to blow. And I do know that there are some Bitcoiners. It's still exceptionally toxic, for want of a better word. People don't necessarily want to come out and expose themselves as Bitcoiners. The narrative needs to change for people to feel more comfortable to do so. But yes, I do believe they exist.
I think it's very interesting, just from a living in the third world perspective, to see that kind of policy in the UK. It's just mind-blowing, you know. I think, and that's maybe the advantage us Africans have
Oh yeah.
We
are so behind. We're going to get left behind. It's all going to flow elsewhere. Absolutely.
It's a very interesting time for the world. I don't know if there were any questions on the Q&A. I just want to have a look at that quickly. But otherwise, just wondering if if the strategic reserve is expedited in the next 2 years, that is instigated and ready to go, are there any other? What is the role of sovereign wealth, etc., to start forerunning the Bitcoin strategic reserve in the States?
So the sovereign wealth funds in Africa are tiny. I mean, as I mentioned, Ethiopia is the biggest at 46 billion. I think Algeria is at 8 billion, and then Zambia is at 4 billion, top three. So they're not really going to make a difference. But the Middle East strategic wealth funds are the ones to watch: Qatar, Kuwait, Saudi, UAE. And they're very sophisticated. There's no question they're looking at Bitcoin. So we just need one of them to make a decent commitment, even a 2% commitment. And those are massive numbers. Then everyone's going to start looking. We need a big sovereign wealth fund to make a move.
Yeah, I would definitely agree there on the Middle East being the area to watch. And, you know, if Trump actually creates his sovereign wealth fund that he said he wanted to do for the US, maybe that's a player depending on how it gets built up. But yeah, the Middle East is where I would put my money to look towards.
Brilliant. I think if we look at global Bitcoin reserves, we've seen some coming out of, obviously, the United States. Bhutan, as we said earlier, they've got 28% of the GDP using hydroelectric power to mine Bitcoin. interesting to see the Czech Republic establishing 5% reserve allocation. So I think that's very interesting to see different nations across the world starting to really come to the party. One of the things that's in the media at the moment is that Russia and China are using Bitcoin and crypto to settle energy trades. Do you think that Trump's strategic reserve adoption perhaps is causing a little bit of provocation to other nations?
No, can I answer this? Because this is something that I did address in my BRICS article. It's the only commodity that, because they wanted to use a commodity-backed currency, and Bitcoin is the only commodity that can be verified. You've got gold in China and you've got oil in Russia, and although they want to have a relationship, they don't trust each other. So it just makes absolute perfect sense that you're going to use a borderless, non-sanctionable money to do this. It's always been on the cards, in my opinion.
Well, I think that's great insight, Susie. Thank you guys very much. I think our time has actually run out. But if you have any closing thoughts, and then we can call it a day. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you.